¿Juegas conmigo?
Run. Run.
¿Juegas conmigo?
Run.
I've never seen such a vicious stepfather. He parked his car on the train tracks and left his 3 children in the car and locked all the doors and windows of the car. He walked to the convenience store without looking back. But the first thing he did was not buy anything, but to ask if the clock was accurate, because he had to wait until 11:15. When the train passes by, he chooses his drink. While he waited for the time to come, when he saw the bottle vibrate, a wry smile finally appeared at the corner of his mouth. And at that moment, the 3 children on the train finally spotted the approaching train. They had to get out immediately, but all the doors were locked. The car keys had been taken away. There was no way to get out. Only the lovely baby in the back seat doesn't know what's going on. It was at that moment of crisis. The boy, who loved to read, finally had an idea in his head. It was to shift the tracks, but the track changer outside the car was too far away. The inventive girl had a flash of insight. Immediately, she took the seat apart, pulling out the springs inside. Then, using a toy doll as a hammerhead, and broke the handle of the window. Finally, a small window was opened. The girl threw the doll on the floor. Using the force of the spring, the doll is catapulted towards the rail changer. Unfortunately, she failed. The doll fell to the ground. They watched the approaching train, pulling the doll back up. Even the baby helps pull the rope together. Then once again, with the greatest of strength, the doll was catapulted out. This time it went very well. The doll wrapped itself around the handle, and then the 2 of them pull hard on the rope. The train was in sight. They were running out of time. Looking at the approaching train, the stepfather finally smiled happily, but just at the last minute, the turntable was finally pulled by the 2 men. The train immediately changed direction. It whizzed past the edge of the car. My stepfather, who was laughing with glee, saw this. It was like being strangled. I couldn't believe my eyes.
This is a true horrifying story that took place in Pakistan. This story was submitted by Amna. In the early 2000s, a young Pakistani man worked in the Jinnah International Airport in Karachi. He would always ride his motorcycle to work, and he only did night shifts. One night, he finished his duty, hopped on his bike, and started driving home. All the roads were empty as it was past midnight. As he was driving, he saw a woman sitting on the edge of the road, crying. He was hesitant to approach, but he felt bad and approached her anyways. He asks, "Is everything okay?" She says, "I forgot my way home. Can you take me?" He says, "Of course." The woman hops on the back seat of the motorcycle and he starts driving down. The woman in the back seat starts sharing stories to this man. She tells him stories about the Pakistan and India partition in 1947 and how many people suffered and died during that era. And she would tell these stories very vividly, as if she lived back in these times. Moments later, she points at a deserted area on the side of the highway and she says, "This is where I died." He looks at her hand as she points and he realizes that this isn't an ordinary human being. His spine shivers from fear. He jumps off his motorcycle at a very high speed. He starts running with his injured arms and legs. He looks behind to see if the woman is behind him, and there she was, standing still from a distance without a single scratch. He luckily sees a police car approaching and he loses his mind. He explains everything to the police officer while the woman still stands and stares at him from a distance. The second he gets inside the police car, the woman vanishes. What could this be? Who is this woman?
Have you ever heard of the Covina massacre? And excuse the stuffiness, I've been really under the weather for the last week. This is the Ortega family, and they lived in Covina, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. Joe and Alice were the mother and father in this family. Joe was only a second-generation American, and his parents had immigrated over here. Joe had done pretty well for himself. He had built his own business and was kind of just living the American dream. After Joe retired, one of his sons took over his business and grew it from there. So financially, the family was doing just fine. Joe and Alice were very family-oriented. They loved spending time with all of their children and their grandchildren. In fact, every Christmas Eve, Alice and Joe would have their entire family come to their house where they would celebrate Christmas together and just spend time together. December 24th of 2008 was no different. Everyone went to Joe and Alice's house. They were just hanging out, having a good time. Some of the kids were in the backyard playing by the pool, while there was a group of people in the living room playing a game of Texas Hold'em. But around 11 p.m., one of the youngest daughters, Katrina, noticed that someone was walking up towards the house. This person was dressed up as Santa Claus. Katrina, being 8 years old, was really excited, so she ran to the front door and threw it open to greet Santa Claus. But instead of presents, this Santa Claus had a gun. And as soon as he entered the house, he opened fire on the entire family. After the Santa Claus opened fire, many of the adults in the living room playing Texas Hold'em hit the floor, while the people in the backyard were able to make an escape and run to the neighbors to ask them to call 911. After the Santa Claus thought he had killed everybody, he went and searched the house. When he was satisfied, he took out a homemade flamethrower. It was with this flamethrower that he set the entire house on fire. By the time police and fire and EMS arrived, the house was completely ablaze, with some reports saying that flames reached as high as 50 feet. Sadly, anyone who was trapped in the house when the fire started would succumb to their injuries. When police began investigating, witnesses saw a blue Dodge car driving away from the scene. What was interesting about this car is that the car had no headlights on whatsoever, which is weird. That same night, 40 miles away, a 911 call came in about a Bruce Padro. He had been found dead in his brother's house. Part 2 is up.